What's up, guys? Welcome back to the MMA meeting. Let's Talk TheWeasle podcast, where we talk all things MMA. Not too much news. There hasn't been a ton of news in the last, few weeks. We have a UFC fight coming up next weekend. The rematch of Ankalaev and Walker, which should be pretty interesting. It looked like Ankalaev seemed to be the better fighter the first time they fought, but Walker's got some pretty interesting tricks, man. He's a dangerous, unpredictable guy, and against a methodical sniper like Ankalaev, some of those strikes from Walker got very close, and I'm specifically talking about that flying knee. That's a kind of sequence that can knock anybody out, right? Walker, I like to say, is a kind of fighter that could beat anybody but lose to anybody at the same time. Johnny Walker is the kind of fighter that could become champ and then cut out the UFC in a single year. Like, there are improvements he's absolutely making fundamentally. If we're going to be honest here, he's looking a lot better than he's ever looked before. He's not just relying on his attributes. He's not just relying on his freakish athleticism. His Muay Thai has gotten so much better. I mean, some people don't even remember that he beat Khalil Roundtree back in the day and knocked him out in the first round. All this praise we're giving Khalil Roundtree, which is 100% deserved. Johnny Walker walked through that guy like it was nothing. If he can hone in some real skills here, Johnny Walker has some of the highest potential in the sport. It's the kind of thing we were talking about before, but the fight IQ, the lack of a chin. He was having issues before with finding a coach that can mesh with him well. It looks like he's got most of that grounded and is now working on developing that skill. But that fight should be very, very interesting. It's a 5-round fight, but I don't imagine it going 5 rounds. Ankalaev can make it go 5 rounds. I don't think Johnny Walker can. Johnny Walker at some point is going to knock you out or he's going to get knocked out. That's always the way it's going to go with this guy. It makes him fun to watch, but sometimes you want to be a bit more methodical in what you're doing out there and not just expose yourself as often as Johnny Walker does, even still today. Matheus Nicolau versus Manel Kape, that's going to be a very, very good fight. I like Manel Kape in the fight, but I think a lot of people are underestimating Matheus Nicolau. Manel Kape's got some steam behind him. He's got some hype. And I honestly think it's mostly because of his trash talking and stuff and not necessarily people understanding his skills as much. The guy is extremely talented. Like, he's very, very good. I've talked about it a few times where his pocket boxing is some of the best in the flyweight division. He has absurd power. He has a very unorthodox stance, very weird mechanics overall. It's not just his trash talking. Manel Kape can absolutely be a top tier fighter. Manel Kape moves in great angles off his own punches. Sometimes will rely on his angles more than a guard. Like, if you look at the way he knocked out Takeya Mizugaki over there in Ryzen, if you look at that finishing sequence from the southpaw stance, he steps out far while showing the left hand, but because of how deep that step was, it made it really look like he was going to commit with the left hand, and instead leaps in with the right uppercut, kind of similar to what Conor McGregor does, and keeps that same momentum deeper on the outside foot, not detouring at all. He is moving on a straight line past Mizugaki's body. But remember, he was southpaw when he did this, right? So when he's keeping that same momentum and Takeya Mizugaki's position is not moving, he's rotating to face Manel Kape, but his position is still the same. Manel Kape was able to carry his momentum from southpaw into orthodox, where Takeya Mizugaki is trying to intercept that momentum, intercept that direction with the left hook, and Manel Kape was very quickly able to come to a stop for the 1-2. Straight punch beating looping. Drops Takeya Mizugaki. Manel Kape has such amazing potential for this flyweight division, man. If he puts everything together, he can easily become the champion. But Matheus Nicolau is a very good kicker. He's developed much better boxing. He's slick on the feet overall. It could be a bit of an issue for Manel Kape to fight him from distance. He's going to most likely have to find his way in. And that could be a bit of an issue, but Brandon Royval did find the knee, right? Manel Kape was known for the flying knee before, and the way Brandon Royval set that up was beautiful. Throughout the fight, he was trapping that lead hand from the southpaw stance, eliminating its use from Matheus Nicolau. So he was locking down that lead hand, and he high knee shifted to the orthodox stance, squared as well. Right hand already extended, and he baited out the left hand to come around his parry hand that's already forward, and simply threw up the knee, leaning slightly to his own left, catching Matheus Nicolau completely unexpected. I can't wait to see that fight. Jim Miller's on that card fighting Gabriel Benitez. That's a good one, and hopefully Jim Miller doesn't get hurt because we want to see him at UFC 300. Phil Haas is on the card. Andrei Arlovski is back. He hasn't fought in like half a year, right? Ever since he lost to Dontel Mayes, and it looks like the loss streak might continue with Waldo, man. Andrei Arlovski's way too old. He's one of those heavyweights that's just around for way too long. But he is part of that dying breed, right? He is part of the old generation fighters that most of those guys just didn't know when to hang it up. Most of them. Uriah Faber did. Well, then he did come back. Where we all thought Uriah Faber would be the guy. Andrei Arlovski, Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, all these older guys just did not know when to hang it up. And the fighter I'm very much looking forward to is Farid Basharat. I think he's the better of the two brothers. I'm expecting some really great things out of him in the future. Now, the biggest thing that people were asking me about was the whole Sean Strickland thing. You know, he was on Theo Von's podcast, which is an excellent podcast, man. I don't have a lot of time to watch podcasts these days. You know, I'm very busy, but that one I had to watch. I heard a lot of things about it, and it was a tough one, right? It's a very tough one to watch, especially if you relate to Sean Strickland in that way. No kid deserves to go through something like that, even as Drickus just said. I saw an interview with Drickus Duplessis on MMA On Point, I believe, and he had similar kind of things to say. He was like, you know, I respect Sean Strickland as a fighter, and even as a person, he's a real man, he's a stand-up guy, and no kid should be going through what he went through. I agree 100% with Drickus, and Drickus is also saying, like, but if you're going to dish it out, if you're going to talk trash about other people, you're going to have to be willing to take it as well, right? Nobody is able to just talk trash like that against others, you know, personal attacks on other people, and not have some kind of karma come back at them. If we're going to be completely fair here, I'm a big Sean Strickland fan, and we have to be very honest and straightforward. He talked a lot of trash about other people, man. When people bring in the same kind of energy, like the way Sean O'Malley or Drickus Duplessis did in that press conference, it can't come to you unexpected, right? You have to expect people to talk trash about you on a similar kind of level as well, right? And in that interview with Theo Von, Strickland was saying, like, you know, wife and kids are out of bounds when it comes to trash talking like this, and childhood trauma. Most people will agree with that, but he's the one that did cross the line a bit. And it was his line that he drew for himself, but he still crossed over it. Not just once, but multiple times about different people. And I think, I'm not a psychologist. I do have a degree in psychology, but I'm not a psychologist, so I can't really psychoanalyze him professionally or anything like that. But just off of what I think, it's hard to expect someone who's gone through the things that he went through, who he is, knowing the way he speaks, knowing how unhinged he can be sometimes, and he can't help himself just to speak the truth. I am not surprised that he doesn't take the criticism back the same way. From people that I know that went through some horrible things in their past, or, you know, they have some kind of like psychological issue because of whatever happened to them, there are some that are able to be stoic and get through it. You know, they're able to fight through the whole thing, strengthen themselves, harden themselves, but usually these people are able to address it somehow. They're able to express themselves enough or get the help that they needed in order to overcome it. They overcome their childhood trauma. But then there are people that never had the opportunity or didn't even want to face it ever in their lives. They were understandably afraid to face this. So even thinking about the past, even just thinking about it, or if people even mention something that can refer to something that happened in their past, even if it's not intentional. There are people that I know that are like this. It was very moving to hear Strickland talk about that. You know, it was very moving, and I think it was good for a lot of people to see. There were also, of course, criticism against him about, you know, why are you talking bad about everybody else, but you react in this way when people talk bad about you, which I think is fair. You know, you get the same energy you're giving out. Most of all, I hope he's able to overcome that whole thing. I believe in him, man. I hope he is able to win that battle someday. Now, back to more MMA stuff. I did run a poll on both Twitter and YouTube just to get the most amount of votes I can. So over 30,000 people voted about which fight is more exciting for them. Alexander Volkanovski versus Ilia Topuria, or Sean O'Malley versus Chito Vera 2. And it looks like an average of about like 74%, right? Somewhere around there. We'll just say 75% of the 30,000 votes say Volk versus Topuria is more exciting to them. The reason why I ran this poll is because Topuria and O'Malley were arguing about who is the bigger star between the two. And not only did Ilia Topuria have more engagement, more likes and stuff like that on his post against O'Malley, I just wanted to see what like the really hardcore fans think about it. That's a lot of people that like the Volk and Topuria fight more than the O'Malley and Chito fight. Now, that doesn't exactly mean that Topuria is a bigger star. It doesn't. But I was just curious to see what the numbers would look like, because Volkanovski's also there, right? Volkanovski's fighting Topuria, who's probably the bigger star overall. Some people actually will debate on that, right? Some people argue against it and say Topuria is the bigger star. Globally, he's apparently huge over there in Spain. Famous football players are friends with him and they go to his fights and stuff. But then again, like maybe the big rugby players for Volk are going to his fights. I don't know. But the thing about O'Malley is I think he has more of the casual fans on his side, right? I think they will watch his fights more. But Aljamain Sterling did come out and say that the pay-per-view numbers of O'Malley were not impressive for him, right? He got the money. He knows what the pay-per-view numbers are, and he was not impressed. He said he should have waited and fought O'Malley much later than he did, because it wasn't worth for him to come back in a few months after his last fight to go against O'Malley, and then he lost his title. He said if he knew the numbers were going to be what they were, he would not have fought O'Malley that quickly. But didn't O'Malley say, like, his numbers did over 500,000 buys. Is he telling the truth? I think Cejudo said it did like 350 or something. And Aljamain said that the O'Malley fight was not his biggest fight of his career. He got more money for another fight. And he says Cejudo was not his biggest fight. So we know that. The only two fights it could be then are the Petr Yan fights or the TJ Dillashaw fight. If Henry Cejudo and O'Malley are not his biggest fights, right? It's not the fights that he made the most money from. It has to be TJ or Petr Yan. But the thing he didn't say about those fights is when he fought TJ and when he fought Yan, he was never the main event. He was the co-main event when he fought TJ Dillashaw. The main event was Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev, which was a very big fight. And below that was Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley on the same card. So most of that pay-per-view was coming from the main event for sure. Charles versus Islam. And then when he fought Petr Yan the second time, the main event was Alexander Volkanovski versus Korean Zombie. He was a co-main event to that. And then the first time he fought Petr Yan, he was the first of 3 title fights on the card. He wasn't even the co-main event. It was Petr Yan versus Aljamain. Then the co-main event was Amanda Nunes versus Megan Anderson. And the main event was Jan Blachowicz versus Israel Adesanya. And we know that card got 800,000 pay-per-view buys. But the thing was, Aljamain was not champ. So he most likely did not get pay-per-view points for that, which leads me to believe that the second Petr Yan fight or the TJ Dillashaw fight was the one where he made the most money. And I think it was the TJ fight because the main event was Oliveira versus Makhachev. Aljamain as the champ also got pay-per-view points most likely for it. That's what I'm thinking here. And if he's saying the only fight he made more money out of was from the TJ fight or the second Yan fight, that doesn't say that O'Malley didn't bring him good numbers. Because the numbers didn't come from TJ before. It didn't come from Petr Yan before. Compared to who else was fighting on the card. Well, maybe Petr Yan because Volkanovski versus Korean Zombie probably wasn't the biggest fight. So I guess Yan definitely did bring some numbers to that one. But I'm pretty certain it was the TJ fight he made the most money out of. And it still boggles my mind that TJ fought with one arm. The guy went into the fight knowing that he couldn't even lift his arm. Right? Even Cub Swanson said the same thing in training. TJ could not even raise his arm because of his shoulder. It's like, what are you doing? You're not going to beat Aljamain with one arm. The injury may have gotten even worse after that fight. So like, what was the point? Unless it was just for the money and he didn't care. But then I have to ask, like, how did he get past the doctors? If the guy only has one shoulder that works, how did the doctors not see it? I think that's pretty obvious to see, right? I don't even think you need to be a doctor in order to see that TJ's a little banged up over here. Hey TJ, can you hold my bag really quick? His arm just like collapses. And because he fought Aljamain with one arm, we had to see Jose Aldo fight Merab, and look how that fight went down. Aldo retired. But then again, it is Aldo's fault for not addressing that issue. You have to defend the takedowns and get off the fence. You can't just defend it and then sit there. I know it's very frustrating. It's not fun to watch. Nobody wants to see that, but it is part of the game, and you do have to counter that sort of fighting style. But if TJ pulled out against Aljamain, got the surgery, recovered, and came back, we could have had Jose Aldo fight Aljamain Sterling, and I really think that Aldo could have had a really good shot against Aljamain. There's an argument to make that Aljamain could have done the same thing that Merab did against Aldo, but I think Aldo had a good style against Aljamain, and it would have been awesome to see Aldo get that second belt. You guys want to know a very interesting question that a lot of people don't agree with? If you want to see how much MMA fans can disagree with each other, ask them this question. It's almost without fail to make the answers divisive. How good of a striker was Khabib? Ask that question and you're going to see answers on the polar opposites of each other. There's going to be people that are going to say Khabib was a very good striker for MMA because, he dropped Conor McGregor. He did very well on the feet with so many high-level strikers. Outstruck Edson Barboza, etc., right? And then on the other side, there's the answers that say that he was a trash striker. Very bad fundamentals, very awkward. His technique was not clean at all. He was only able to strike because of his takedown threat. It's a quite interesting question to ask. It's not just about Khabib. It's about what makes you a good striker in this sport. I think it's a question that's almost impossible to accurately answer for real. It's very hard to know who the best strikers are because the truth of the matter is a lot of times in order to become the best striker, you also have to have very good takedown defense or takedown offense. You have to. Let's say if you don't have takedown defense, but you're an amazing striker, you're going to get taken down and beaten, man. You're going to get taken down by a good wrestler and you're going to lose, and you might get outstruck by him too. It's very important to make the distinction between pure striking and MMA striking. In this sport of MMA, most of the time you need grappling in order to showcase your striking skills. If you don't have the grappling, it's going to be tough for you to ever even display that. You're barely going to have a chance, right? There's Alex Pereira, who is able to get away with it, or, sometimes even Adesanya, mainly because their divisions didn't really have great wrestlers for most of their time period. Imagine you had some of those wrestlers from welterweight or lightweight, and you brought them to the middleweight and light heavyweight divisions. I don't think Pereira Adesanya could strike as well as they do. Right? Can you imagine an Arman Tsarukyan or an Islam Makhachev fighting Alex Pereira or Adesanya? That's a whole different kind of fight than Jan Blachowicz, right? That's a whole different kind of fight than Marvin Vettori. The wrestling skills are not even close. And that's what makes Khabib, in my opinion, and other wrestlers actually good strikers for MMA. Not in pure striking. If Khabib fought Conor in a pure striking contest, Conor is going to beat Khabib. But in MMA, Khabib is able to strike with Conor McGregor and even beat him overall because he did drop him. The takedown threat is so menacing. It's so alarming in a fight when you're fighting someone like this. They're able to strike with you. Now, there is a good counter argument. Well, wrestling doesn't actually make you a better striker for the sport. It degrades the opponent to a level below yours. I think this is a good argument against that whole narrative. But what does it really matter? With Khabib being the example, what does it matter that he degrades all of his opponent's striking skills to a level below his, or at least competitive with his, if that's going to be a thing with all of his opponents? He's going to have good striking performances against everybody, regardless. When you fight Khabib, when you fight Tyron Woodley in his prime, when you fight Kamaru Usman, you're going to have a problem with the striking. And it's not because these guys are so clean of strikers, they're so technical, they're doing calf kicks, they're a part of the new meta, they're spamming feints all over the place. Like, they don't need to do all of that stuff. And they will still outstrike you, just because they have a takedown threat. If Wonderboy fought Tyron Woodley in a pure striking contest, Woodley would get massacred. It would not even be close at all. But in MMA, he's able to outstrike Wonderboy. He's able to outstrike Tyron Woodley. Or at least drop him. He's able to be dangerous enough on the stand-up because he has such a big wrestling threat to Wonderboy. It makes Wonderboy a lot more tentative than he would be in a pure striking contest, therefore allowing Tyron Woodley to strike with him in MMA. Same thing goes with Kamaru Usman in his prime, Colby Covington in his prime, Kevin Randleman sometimes in his prime. Kevin Randleman knocked Mirko Cro Cop out on the stand-up. Why? He had such a menacing takedown threat. He was WWE slamming people on their heads. You do not want to get taken down by that guy. So it makes him a lot easier to hit in the stand-up. Kevin Randleman would get annihilated by Mirko Cro Cop in a striking match. So I do see a bit of a flaw when we're talking about good striking in MMA to look at pure striking skills. I don't think that's as important. What can they use in the bounds of this sport to make themselves an effective striker? But everybody has a different look on this. Everybody has a different perspective. Some people think knockout artists are the best strikers because they're achieving the ultimate goal of striking, knocking the opponent out, regardless of how their technique looks, right? There's a lot of people that believe that even if you got the ugliest punches in the world, but you're knocking everybody out, it makes you the best striker. Or some people believe that if you have the best technique, you are the best striker. There's also people that believe that if you got the best results out of your striking and you're able to outstrike all of your opponents, regardless of your technique and knockout power, you are the best striker. It's a very interesting topic, and once you really start thinking about what makes a good striker for the sport, it becomes kind of silly at some point because you really don't know anymore, right? We say Alex Pereira and Israel Adesanya are the best strikers, just like when people used to think that Anderson Silva was the best striker, but he got outstruck by Chael Sonnen and Chris Weidman in the second fight more specifically. He didn't fight a whole lot of good wrestlers. Chael was a good wrestler, Dan Henderson a good Greco-Roman, and Chris Weidman was a good wrestler. Against Chael and Weidman, he had the hardest time in the stand-up when he was in the UFC in his prime. But those guys are not necessarily like great strikers, especially Chael. If anybody asks that question, who's the best striker, what makes you a good striker in this sport, it's really hard to answer that accurately. And did you guys see the odds makers give, I guess, kind of their predictions and betting odds on who's going to become champion by the end of 2024? Most of them are not too surprising. Most of the champs they do believe are going to hold their belt, especially Islam Makhachev and Zhang Weili are the only champions right now that are favored to end the year with the belt. The only champion they predict to not hold the belt is Sean Strickland. They think that Strickland's chances of holding the belt until the end of 2024 is a plus 400. He's a plus 400 underdog to hold that belt until the end of the year. The number one guy they pick for the middleweight division is Khamzat. Khamzat's odds are plus 100. They're giving him a higher chance of ending the year as champ than any other fighter outside of Islam for lightweight and Zhang Weili for strawweight. Higher chance than Tom Aspinall at heavyweight, who's a plus 175. higher than Alex Pereira in the light heavyweight division, who's a plus 200. He's twice the underdog that Khamzat is. Leon Edwards is also tied with him at plus 100 for the welterweight division. Islam is a minus 120 for the lightweight division. Volkanovski is a plus 125 for featherweight. Sean O'Malley's number 1 at bantamweight with plus 150. I'm surprised they didn't put Merab above him. Merab is number 2 at plus 250, and then Umar is plus 275. I don't agree with Corey Sandhagen being plus 500. That is crazy. And then Alexandra Pantoja for the flyweight division is a plus 120. The women's strawweight division is Zhang Wei Li minus 125. The women's flyweight division is Alexa Grasso at plus 200. And then the women's bantamweight division is Juliana Pena at plus 250. So they're picking Khamzat to be the guy that ends the year as the champion with comparably good odds to everybody else. So Sean Strickland is plus 400 in second place. Dricus is plus 500 in third place. So they're saying, yeah, Khamzat's becoming champ over those two. Like, they're so far below him, even though they're second and third. Then they have Bo Nickel at plus 600 in fourth place. Bo Nickel, who's probably not even going to fight a ranked fighter this year, let alone get into a title fight. How is he plus 600 when Jared Cannonier is a 16-1? He's below even Brendan Allen and Israel Adesanya and Ikram Aliskerov. But he's one fight away from a title shot, and he has a win over the current champ. Robert Whittaker is even below him at 20-1 odds. Kamaru Usman is at 100-1 odds for the middleweight division, even though he came very close to beating the number 1 pick, Khamzat Chimaev. Usman is ranked at like number 20 to end the year as champ with 100-1 odds, but he nearly beat the number 1 guy on short notice. Where do you even bet on this? Now, do I agree with this? Do I believe that Khamzat will become champ at the end of the year, or at least he has the highest chance of doing so? I might agree with it. It's just, I could think Dricus could be a pretty difficult fight for this guy. Only if Dricus is able to go 5 rounds. If Dricus still has that poor cardio issue, then it's a bit up in the air because Khamzat also has not shown to have great cardio. But I do think Khamzat's wrestling overall is superior to Dricus's. He does have enough power to hurt him, but Dricus has shown in the past to have a pretty good chin over there in KSW. The guy fought Roberto Soldic twice, got knocked out by him, but he did eat a lot of shots from a big power puncher. And I'll probably make a breakdown on those fights. They're very, very interesting how those went down. But it was a welterweight division. Dricus was smaller. He did cut more weight. So did Roberto Soldic. But he was able to show a decent chin even at welterweight, right? And I can only imagine his chin is better in the middleweight division. The thing about Khamzat versus Strickland is Strickland has good takedown defense, but I still think he's going to get dominated in the first round. And if he doesn't get finished, I think by the time the third and fourth round comes, Strickland's going to give it to Khamzat. Kind of similar to what could happen between Strickland and Dricus as well. The cardio difference with Strickland is a big weapon against both of these guys. Okay, I will agree that Khamzat has the best chance of ending the year as champ, but I will lower Strickland's and Dricus's odds to not be that far off from Khamzat. So if they have Khamzat as a plus 100, I would put Strickland at like plus 150, 170, and then Dricus pretty much equal, like plus 150, 170. Not 4 and 500. I don't agree with that. For the welterweight division, you got Shavkat at number 2 at plus 250, Bilal at number 3 with plus 300, Islam at number 4 as a plus 600, then Ian Gary, Sean Brady, and Kamaru Usman at 11-1 odds. They have the same odds for Ian Gary and Kamaru Usman to end the year as champ. The only way that makes sense is for the fact that Usman already lost twice to Leon, and he's probably not going to get another title shot as long as Leon holds that belt. But Jack Della Maddalena is a 35-1 underdog compared to Ian Gary's 11-1. Jack's fighting a higher ranked opponent. He's fighting Gilbert Burns, so if he beats Gilbert, he has a much better chance of fighting for the belt this year than even Ian Gary does, right? If he beats Burns, he's a top 5 welterweight. If Ian Gary beats Jeff Neal, he's like top 7. And they have Jeff Neal as a plus 150-1 when he can beat Ian Gary. So I don't know how that makes any sense. He's also ranked higher than Ian Gary. And he could put up some good fights with some of these guys. He's the only one that really tested Shavkat, although he did come in very heavy. For the lightweight division, the number 2 guy is Charles Oliveira at plus 300, then Arman Saryukian at plus 400, Justin Gaethje at plus 500, Dustin Poirier at plus 750, Mateusz Gamrot at plus 800, and then it falls off a cliff with Michael Chandler at a 35-1 underdog, where I can argue that Michael Chandler has a better chance of ending the year as champion over Mateusz Gamrot, and maybe even over Dustin Poirier. And it's not because of his skills. It's because he's fighting Conor McGregor. If he beats Conor McGregor and knocks him out, let's say, they are absolutely going to give him a title shot at lightweight or welterweight. A win over Conor on that kind of magnitude, they're not going to throw him into a contender fight as a co-main event after. He's going to have to main event a card because he's going to blow up as a star. So they're going to have him most likely fight Islam or Leon or something. And his chances of beating Islam I think are better than Mateusz Gamrot's. And maybe even over Dustin Poirier, just for the fact that he has those first 2 rounds to bulldoze Islam. Very good takedown defense early, very powerful. He does open himself up. He probably will lose, but at least I think he has a better chance than the way that Gamrot and Poirier would fight Islam. Gamrot and Poirier would get out-grappled completely, first round to the 5th. Chandler at least has a first, potentially second round to not get taken to the ground. And as long as that happens, he always has a chance to knock you out. And he does some good things out there before he gets hit. So some of these rudimentary feints that he will throw forward could trick Islam at some point just enough where he can land a right hand and knock him out. 35-1 odds for Michael Chandler to end the year as champ is crazy in my opinion, because Islam is most likely going to fight 2 times this year. For sure if he doesn't fight in March. If he fights after Ramadan, I don't see how Islam has more than 2 title fights this year. And we know that Chandler is going to fight Conor in the summer. If Chandler goes out there and KOs Conor like he's favorited to do, they're absolutely going to capitalize on that. You want to know one of the craziest things to see? Paddy Pimblett has the same odds of ending the year as champ as Dan Hooker, Jalen Turner, and Alexander Volkanovski for the lightweight division. Even though Volk lost to Islam twice, I still think he has a better chance of ending the year as champ as Paddy Pimblett. And for sure, Jalen Turner does. Like, that's not even a question. You want to know who's in last place on the fighters they listed for lightweight? Sadly, it's Tony Ferguson. He's a 1,000-1 underdog. They're just mistaken, man. Tony's going to have the comeback. He needs to take some steps back in order to step forward. You know what I'm saying? 2024 is the year of El Kukui. You're going to see. He's going to come back. Please, Tony, just retire. For the featherweight division, the number 2 spot is, of course, Ilia Topuria at plus 240. Then number 3 is Aljamain Sterling at plus 550. Max Holloway is at plus 650, Arnold Allen 10-1, Movsar Evloev 18-1, Brian Ortega, Yair Rodriguez, and Joe Anderson Brito at 50-1. But they have Giga Shikadze at 80-1. That doesn't make too much sense to me. Even though Joe Anderson Brito's a very good fighter, he's finishing so many of his opponents right now. The guy's not ranked though. Giga Shikadze is in the top 10. He has a much higher likelihood of fighting for the belt this year than Joe Anderson Brito. And here's the thing, at least Giga has the head kick against both these guys. Topuria and Volkanovski don't deal too well with head kicks. Topuria has gotten dropped or rocked by more than one head kick throughout his career. Volk just got KO'd by one and nearly got caught clean by many of them. But Giga is 6 feet tall. Very, very long fighter. Very fast and is in his prime. This one is completely crazy. Josh Emmett, 75-1. 75-1. He's under Joe Anderson Brito. He's under Brian Ortega. He's under Movsar Evloev, where he might be fighting Max Holloway next. And if there's anybody that could KO Max Holloway, it is Josh Emmett in the featherweight division. If you beat Max Holloway, you're going to get a title shot. So 75-1 under all of those guys does not make any sense considering the position that Josh Emmett is in right now. Kelvin Kattar is 100-1. Nah, that is crazy. Bantamweight division, the number 2 guy is Merab at plus 250. Umar is plus 275, so just under him. Aljamain plus 350. Then Corey Sandhagen plus 500. I would put Corey above Aljamain because Aljamain's a 145er. Cejudo's at plus 600. Chito 10-1. Song is also 10-1. Petr Yan is 25-1. Isn't it crazy where he was? Everybody thought that he was the best bantamweight on the planet a couple years ago. One of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. And now they're giving him 25-1 chances. The same as Jonathan Martinez and Davison Figueiredo, but I would put Davison above that. I think it's way too low for Davison. And also I think a bit too low for Petr Yan. Damir Ismagulov is 75-1 at lightweight. Even though the guy isn't in the UFC right now, right? He didn't sign a new contract. For heavyweight, Almeida is the second place at plus 200. Then John Jones, 450. Then Pavlovich at plus 600. Cyril Gane plus 700. Stipe 10-1. Volkov 15-1. Spivak 30-1. And then Curtis Blades 55-1. They're putting Curtis Blades lower than Spivak and Stipe? Even though Stipe is closer to becoming the champ, that much higher than Blades? To say that Curtis Blades could not end the year as champ is insane. He can beat Almeida. He could stop the takedowns and outstrike him. He can out-wrestle Cyril Gane. He could put up a competitive fight with Tom Aspinall. To overlook Curtis Blades to that extent, like I understand if he's like below Pavlovich, that makes sense, but he's nearly double the underdog that Sergey Spivak is, and he's on the same level as Shamil Gaziev? No, dude, that is crazy. And with that, let's go right to the questions. We're going to start with EHMT. Hey Weasel, on average, how many training does it take to achieve professional level skills in each of those core martial art disciplines? I'm in awe at the grind these pro fighters endure. Thanks for content, never miss a video. That's awesome, man. Thank you. Every single skill takes a different amount of time, and it's going to depend on the specific sport. So like in boxing, it's going to take you a lot longer to get to the professional level than it would be if you're learning boxing for MMA, because MMA just has a faster track to a professional level. With wrestling, you usually have to go through the school system. High school wrestling, recreational wrestling, before you get into college, and from there you could potentially get to the Olympics. It's going to depend on the specific sport, and every martial art is going to be different. Then you got stuff like Taekwondo and Karate, where you're trying to get a black belt, then you want to become professional. Black belts differ depending on who your teacher is. I would say on average, to get a black belt in Taekwondo, let's say, it could take you like 10 years, but it's really going to depend. Some people take like 7 years. And that's not even getting into professional fighting, right? That's just to get your black belt. And you don't need a black belt to become a professional kickboxer, but it would be ideal if your background is Taekwondo. But it would be ideal. I think Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu might be somewhat similar, like 10 years of consistent work. Unless you're going to some McDojos, you can get that black belt overnight. But yeah, it takes a very, very long time to get to a professional level. I think MMA may have the shortest path to professional fighting. They really don't have a background itself. Some guys just get right into MMA. I think Rory McDonald is one of those guys. He was one of the first to do that, where he didn't really have a background in anything. He just went into MMA training and became a professional fighter. One of the best welterweights in the world at one point. He started training at 14 years old, and he had his first professional fight at 16. You don't see that in a lot of these other combat sports, just a few of them. Then we get to Jay Harris, Too Real. Hey Weasel, thanks for always delivering the best content. No problem, man. This might be a king shot, but I'm curious about these fantasy matchups. Zabit versus a few OG fighters all in their prime. So we're going to use Zabit as we knew him, not speculating if he had his issues corrected, because we have no idea. So Zabit versus Conor McGregor, I'm guessing this is a 5-round fight. I would pick Zabit to submit Conor, maybe, but that's a difficult fight. Jose Aldo, I would pick Jose Aldo. TJ Dillashaw at 145, I'm for sure picking Zabit. Henry Cejudo, I would also pick Zabit, but the later rounds could be quite tough, as Cejudo will put the pressure on him. Max Holloway, I think Max might be the most difficult fight for Zabit, for the fact that he will not get knocked out. Zabit didn't have that kind of power. He will get taken down a few times, I think, early on, but then as Zabit starts gassing in the 3rd and 4th and 5th, I think Max would overwhelm him with strikes. And then Chad Mendes. Now, Chad's cardio did not make sense. That second Jose Aldo fight, how did they not gas out? Was it that they fought at a similar kind of rhythm the whole time and they were able to keep up a consistent pace the whole fight? Because we've seen them gas out in fights way before a 5th round. But against Aldo, it went all 5 rounds at a very, very fast pace. If Chad gasses out, Zabit is going to beat him. If Chad has that 5-round cardio, Chad is going to beat Zabit. So I think more likely we're going to see a Chad that gasses out, and I think Zabit would beat him. Then we go to Nano. Hey Weasel, OG fan right here. I was wondering, how would you correct these fighters' tendencies or mistakes that they do in the octagon? McGregor, Yuri, Cejudo, Chito, Whitaker, Volk, Fiziev, and Shavkat. Thank you for all the breakdowns, my friend. Much love from the North Pole. Shout out to Santa Claus, and shout out to you as well, man. How would I fix or correct these fighters' mistakes? So with Conor McGregor, he doesn't check leg kicks from a southpaw too well. That's a big thing against him. He gives up positions sometimes on the ground. As the fight keeps going, in the later rounds, he will accept certain positions, and that is not good. So definitely have to fight out of these things, keep a higher level of urgency in the later rounds. And if he cannot check these calf kicks from a southpaw fighter, he's got to use his movement. If you remember early on in the second Dustin Poirier fight, Dustin did throw a leg kick and Conor was able to step away from it and make the kick miss. He can re-enter from that to land some big shot on Dustin. A smart bait to this is to have a lot of lead step feints. Reinforcing that with leans to show the left hand can be a bit risky as it does lengthen your planting. A good lead step squat feint can give a good illusion that Conor is too heavy to avoid a potential calf kick. But this can quickly be used to step out of with the lead foot alone, bringing it back to meet your back foot, right? This is something that in boxing you're taught not to do too much, but in MMA it can absolutely be effective. Your lead foot is far out forward. You could retract that to your back foot, so then you have a natural re-entry once the opponent misses the calf kick, if he can't check it because of his bladed stance. So that's one correction for Conor McGregor. Yuri Prochazka, trust in your wrestling, trust in the takedown. Don't just be a striker. You have a ground game and you can use it offensively if things are going too well in the stand-up, right? If he actually went that direction and trusted his wrestling more against Alex Pereira, I think he could have won that fight because the takedown wasn't that hard for him. It was that one guillotine at one point where Alex was threatening it, but the takedown itself was not that difficult, and he kept top control pretty easily on Alex. Another thing for Yuri, I would say he has to trust more in the fundamental boxing more than anything else. I think if Yuri kept a more disciplined 1-2, his chances of beating all these guys skyrocket. In fact, look at the Volkan Oezdemir fight. When he was throwing all the craziness out there, he was being so unpredictable and so unorthodox, it got him caught sometimes. And then when he put down the 1-2, it was more of an overhand than a straight, but the 2 would have succeeded as well. So even in that fight with Volkan, it still wasn't a completely disciplined 1-2 that he went with. One of the most textbook ways I've ever seen him throw it. He knocked Volkan out. Sometimes with these unorthodox techniques, even if he's winging these punches and putting a lot of leverage, they're not as lethal as if he used a simple 1-2. Then for Henry Cejudo, he needs a lot more feints. He could be a little bit too honest sometimes on what he's trying to do. The Dominic Cruz fight, he had a lot more feints he was working with, but in some of these other fights, man, he's like way too honest. Like, you kind of know what he's trying to do. He has his karate stance sometimes, and it's a lot of emphasis on the right hand. And just generally holding that stance in front of somebody, it's going to make them focus on your right hand because of the way you're holding it. And if he gave more feints with the right hand, or the right kick, or faked like he was going to throw a left hook or a jab, it can open things up as he cocks back his right hand to throw that out there. Or if he faked more takedowns. There needs to be, I think, a higher output of feints to Cejudo that can really allow him to control the pace of a fight. And more importantly than anything, control the distance, because he needs that against these bantamweights. He needs to control the distance. Aljamain was controlling distance on Cejudo, which is crazy. That should not happen for someone that was supposed to be the better striker of the two. But then again, Aljamain does have the reach, but the feints takes a lot of those advantages away, man, if you just know how to use it. Then for Robert Whittaker, don't have to be super bouncy. I think he actually does his best technical work when he's walking opponents down. When he gets into his blitz, it becomes like a suicide mission. He can hurt you because of the amount of power and weight going forward at the opponent, but he can also get himself knocked out in the meantime. That linear back and forth bounce he has can make his initial entry predictable, as shown against Cannonier, Till, and Dricus. And these aren't like the most competent strikers. I think Whittaker does better work when he's grounded. The blitz should be a lot more occasional than it is, especially now that I can only imagine fighters know how to counter it after what Dricus just did to him. So grounded feet is going to allow him to set up combinations a little bit differently, and I think with more consistent power in everything he throws. Not just the right high kick at the end, not just the right straight as he's blitzing at you, but everything is going to have a lot more power. When you're blitzing in, sometimes your feet are not completely under you when you're throwing your strikes. It's only during some of them. When you're grounded, every time you throw a strike, you have your feet under you, and Whittaker a lot of times does not have his feet under him when he's blitzing. It's very difficult to do. And with that, there's going to be a lot more stutter step opportunities, a lot more feints he can work with, whereas blitzing from distance is very reliant on your speed, and you are a lot more honest on what you're doing because you're going one direction. If you're grounded more, you can take different angles at different strikes and movements. If I feint step forward, I can fake my left hand, throw the right straight as I step to the side, and then I could jab away at an angle. There's a lot more stuff you can work with there. Alexander Volkanovski, he doesn't have many mistakes, but you guys do know what the biggest one is. The head kick defense has to be worked on more. Block with two arms. Don't lean into them too much. There is a way where you can lean into the startup of the kick so you can stuff it. That's a very risky thing that you saw Justin Gaethje doing against Dustin Poirier the second time they fought. That's very risky to do, taking your eyes off the opponent like that. I don't recommend it. But Volk doesn't even do that. Volk will lean into a high kick sometimes and not put both of his hands up in order to block it. A lot of times he's blocking with one hand. This has happened many times throughout his career. That's like the biggest flaw, of course, of Volkanovski, but the guy doesn't have many of them, man. He's very close to that perfect fighter you're looking for. Rafael Fiziev got to do more laps on that treadmill or something, because if this guy had 5-round cardio, he'd be a very hard fighter to handle. You know what they say about Nick and Nate Diaz? They don't lose, they just run out of time. With Fiziev, it's he would have won, but there was just too much time. And then for Shavkat Rakhmonov, better drive for double legs, better body weight commitment with the single legs, and moving the head a lot more, or at least pick the hands up more consistently when someone's throwing punches. Then we go to Richard Connolly. Hey Weasel, 2 questions here, man, if you don't mind. Number 1, if Max Holloway decided to try and use a grappling heavy approach on Justin Gaethje and submit him, or try to shove him against the fence stalling, do you think it could work, or Justin is just too strong and could escape? Justin's too strong. I don't see Holloway taking him down. I think there's a big misunderstanding about Justin Gaethje's takedown defense. Max Holloway is probably not taking this guy down, right? Khabib can take him down because that's Khabib, right? Max does not even come close to Khabib's wrestling. So I do think that Justin will stuff the takedowns and he would not allow himself to get stalled on the fence. Justin has very unique techniques out of a clinch. He can kick you from there, which is crazy, right? A few leg kicks from Justin, even in the clinch, will do an enormous amount of damage on Max Holloway, who generally doesn't check kicks that well, even from distance. Number 2, do you think after UFC 284, Volk got overconfident and too cocky and believed in his own hype too much? He seemed unwilling to acknowledge that Islam did have a shorter rehydration time, which may have affected Islam's strength and energy levels, and his team even accused Islam of IVs, which was never proved. After the second loss, though, he's been silent about Islam and has not said anything that alludes to foul play whatsoever. Still though, Volk is deciding to turn around just 4 months after a knockout loss, which is not that much time for recuperation. It seems like Volk is the type of fighter that is going to fall victim to his own stubbornness and his ego, and that he won't stop until it's much too late and we as fans no longer recognize him. What's your opinion on him though and his latest career decisions? Much love, men. Have a great new year. Thank you so much, and you as well. Very interesting question. Back in UFC 284, I think at this point most of the fans are acknowledging that Islam did get affected by the shorter rehydration time, because it wasn't just the knockout in the second fight, but also Islam looked a lot stronger in the clinch as well than he did in the first fight. Yeah, and the whole thing about the IVs, it just sounds like excuses, especially from Dan Hooker, but who really knows? For them to say that Islam is taking PEDs, you gotta have some kind of evidence in them doing it. That camp is getting a bit flack, especially after what happened with Usman Nurmagomedov. He failed the drug test, and that comment from Ali Abdelaziz was very, very weird. The whole thing about the IV. But on the other side, there are a lot of people that are just saying that Dan Hooker is just salty about that loss to Islam. So I don't really know. I don't really have too many opinions on it. If Islam is doing something, I'd like to see evidence that he's taking PEDs instead of just saying he did. Now, about Volkanovski's career decision of coming back after 4 months, man, we'll see. He's bargaining big time here, because I don't know if Topuria is the kind of guy you want to make that short turnaround against. And it's not really 4 months. It's more realistically like 3 or even 2.5 months, because you have to remember that he is sparring. Most of the damage to these fighters don't come from a fight. Most of the damage usually comes from sparring. He might even be sparring as we speak. And when you're in training camp, most fighters are not just dilly-dallying in the training room. Most fighters are going to be hard sparring. He's most likely not giving his brain a rest. And I don't think Ilia Topuria is the kind of guy you want to make those kind of risky decisions against. Then we go to No Scope. Your top 5 to 10 exciting potential competitive fights that were put together but got canceled. So not in order, but for me, the number 1 is Khabib versus Tony. I think that is the one for most of us. That fills up the top 5. So there you go. Top 5 is Khabib versus Tony, which is crazy how many times that fell apart. My number 2 would be Jose Aldo versus Anthony Pettis, both in their prime. Who remembers when Anthony Pettis was going to come down to 145 to fight Aldo? It was when Pettis pulled out and then Korean Zombie stepped in, and Korean Zombie's shoulder got blown out and Aldo started kicking it like an absolute savage. That would have been very interesting with prime Anthony Pettis. But knowing how Aldo attacked Korean Zombie with much more wrestling, I think he had that kind of game plan against Pettis as well, right? He was probably going to use his wrestling against Pettis. I think he would have won. Back then, I was a lot more iffy. I mean, I was very young, but now looking back at it, I'm pretty sure Jose Aldo would have won. I would also have to put in there Vitor Belfort versus Vanderlei Silva 2. They were supposed to do the rematch. This was like back in 2012. Vitor got pulled out of the fight, and Vanderlei fought Rich Franklin instead. The rematch was going to be very interesting because everybody remembers back then the legendary finish where Vitor Belfort blitzed down Vanderlei in like 40 seconds and TKO'd him. They were finally going to have that rematch that people wanted to see for a long time. I would absolutely have to throw in Khamzat Chimaev versus Leon Edwards. They were supposed to fight each other like 3 times, all during the whole COVID thing, and it never happened. That was going to be very interesting. And honestly, if they fought each other back then, it would have changed a lot of their trajectories right now. One of these two probably would not get as far as they are right now because they would have to rebuild themselves. But it was back in like 2020, 2021. So there is a possibility they could have came back. Let's say if Khamzat beat Leon, right? The head kick heard around the world would not have happened. And Khamzat could have gotten the 170 belt, challenge Izzy for a super fight that would sell nearly 1 million pay-per-view buys, or Usman would have beaten Khamzat once their fight goes into the 4th and 5th rounds. But things would have been very different if they fought each other. Because now Khamzat is thought to be I mean, odds makers are having him as the #1 pick to become the middleweight champion at the end of 2024. And Leon Edwards is right now the welterweight champion with 2 title defenses. This is probably not like a popular pick, but I would have loved to see Jorge Masvidal fight Bobby Green when he was supposed to. They were matched up against each other a few times, and I would love to have seen that fight. Can you imagine the boxing exchanges between them two? It would have been amazing to watch. Back in the lightweight division when Jorge was a lot more defensive though. And finally, I would have to put in Conor McGregor versus Rafael dos Anjos. I was so hyped for that fight because back then I was a big RDA fan. This is before I was making MMA content, and I was also a very big Conor fan. I remember watching all the fan promos. Me and my friends used to talk about it all the time, and then RDA pulls out, man. And then Nate Diaz stepped in and beat Conor McGregor. I think RDA would have been competitive for Conor, or maybe even beat him because it looked like Conor may have been a little bit overconfident, at least as shown in the Nate Diaz fight. So good question, man. And then we go to Sesh. Hey Weasel, loving the longer podcast style videos. I miss Zabit. How would he be doing in the featherweight division if he hadn't retired to become a doctor? Similar as before, we don't know if his cardio issue would have been solved with the surgery. We can only speculate. That's what he had the operation for, was the diaphragm spasms. But I'll just talk about the Zabit that we did see, right? The one with the cardio issues. I think he would have beaten Lerone Murphy. I think he would have beaten Alex Caceres. I think he beats Dan Ige, Sadiq Youssef, Edson Barboza, Bryce Mitchell, Movsar Evloev, Giga Shikadze. Giga has worse cardio than he did. And Zabit has a medical issue. Kelvin Kattar. I think in a 5-rounder, Kelvin Kattar would have beaten him. But in a 3-rounder, I'd still give it to Zabit. Josh Emmett. I would give this to Zabit. Ilia Topuria. I would say Ilia wins. Brian Ortega. In a 3-rounder, I'll give it to Zabit. In a 5-rounder, I'd probably go with Ortega because he's just way too tough. And he would hang in, not because he's like more skilled or more technical, literally only because he's so tough he can get into the 5th round and overwhelm or knock out a very tired Zabit. Arnold Allen. I would go with Arnold. He has a very good gas tank. Yair Rodriguez. This is actually one of the fights I would have loved to have seen. I didn't even think about it. Yeah, Zabit and Yair were supposed to fight each other. And then Yair didn't want to fight him. Apparently got cut from the UFC for it, which is insane. Yeah, so I would have definitely put this in that list of fights that we didn't get to see. So many fights have happened, man. It's so easy to forget when you've been watching for so long. I feel like I'm getting old. In a 3-round fight, 100% Zabit wins. In a 5-round fight, I'd probably give it to Yair. But I think Zabit has a better chance if you average out their chances. Because even in a 5-round fight, I can see Zabit potentially submitting Yair on the ground before he even gets into the championship rounds. So I would ultimately just pick Zabit overall. But I can definitely see Yair having a bit of a better chance in a 5-rounder. Max Holloway, for 3 rounds, I got Zabit. For 5 rounds, I got Holloway. Volkanovski, I got Volk. Probably for both 3 rounds and 5 rounds. The big thing that goes against Holloway is that sometimes he's just a slow starter. That could hurt him in a 3-round fight with Zabit. And then we go to Vivid MMA. Hey Weasel, what's more impressive? Being undefeated, winning every round and having some decisions, or being undefeated, losing some rounds but finishing every fight? Also, who are your top 15 greatest pound-for-pound MMA fighters of all time? I think what's more impressive between getting all decisions but winning every round and losing some rounds but finishing every fight, I think fighter B in that case is the more impressive fighter. Finishing fights consistently could be a very difficult feat to achieve. Winning every round, though, is also very difficult itself, but you can have a certain style that's just horrible for the weight class. Imagine you're some elite wrestler at middleweight with competent striking skills. You might win every single round, right? Because most of these guys can't wrestle with you at all. And you're good enough on the feet to not get caught. So that's why I would say, in my opinion, fighter B in this case is the more impressive fighter. And then my top 15 greatest pound-for-pound fighters of all time. Oh, right off the top of my head? Okay, so take this with a grain of salt because I'm putting barely any thought into this one. With this kind of list, I would really have to think about it. Number 1, Demetrius Johnson. Number 2, GSP. Number 3, Khabib. Number 4, Islam. Number 5, Volkanovski. Number 6, John Jones. Number 7, Jose Aldo. Number 8, Kamaru Usman. Number 9, Robert Whittaker. Number 10, Dominic Cruz. Number 11, TJ Dillashaw. Number 12, Charles Oliveira. Number 13, Dustin Poirier. Number 14, Justin Gaethje. And number 15, Leon Edwards. I'm going to watch that back and see how much I disagree with it. That should be its own challenge. In 15 seconds, Name your top 15 pound for pound fighters. Then we go to Fat Kid Inc. It sucks, but there really are slim pickings now for the 300 main event. What do you see as the most likely matchups to be the UFC 300 main event? And what would be your dream main event? So I did cover this before. Well, actually, I never talked about my dream main event, but I think the main event is probably going to be Alex Pereira versus either Tom Aspinall or Israel Adesanya. Knowing now that Conor is not going to be on 300, I think it has to be Pereira. Or they're waiting on the winner of Strickland and Dricus. It can't be Leon. You know, I was going to say, there is a possibility of being Leon. Let's say if he fought like Khamzat comes back down if he could do it. Right, that would be an interesting main event for 300. But Leon versus Bilal is not main event worthy for 300 at all. That's barely main card worthy. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so I think it's Alex Pereira. I think him versus Aspinall or Israel Adesanya would be a pretty interesting main event for 300. I know most people would want to see a better main event, a superstar, like a Brock Lesnar comes back for the third time, you know, kind of thing. But we're not left with many options. So out of the options that we do have, I think Pereira is the most likely guy to fight for the main event. And then my dream main event would be Khabib comes back and fights Leon Edwards. That would be my dream main event. It would be awesome, but that is not happening. Then we'll go to Conor L. Hi, Weasel. Could you rank the undefeated fighters on who's most likely to be defeated this year and who least likely? Love your content. Thank you so much, man. Most likely undefeated fighter to lose this year. Oh, number one is Ilia Topuria. It's obvious. He's fighting Volkanovski. Like, at that level, it's very hard to sustain an undefeated record. It's not because Ilia's bad. He's fighting literally one of the best fighters we've ever seen in the sport. And he's undefeated in that title fight. That is very difficult to do. And very difficult to sustain even after winning the belt. Right? If he wins the belt, his chances of losing, I think, are even higher. So the higher you go in this sport, the harder it is to stay undefeated, of course. Right? That's why I think Khamzat Chimaev and Shavkat also have a higher likelihood of losing than some of the other undefeated guys who are outside the top 15. Because Khamzat and Shavkat are going to be fighting higher ranked opponents in their divisions. Muhammad Mokaev is in a similar kind of place as well. So I would say Ilia Topuria is number one. I would put Khamzat and Shavkat like equally at number two. I would put Muhammad Mokaev at number three. I would put Ian Gary at number four. And Azamat Murzakanov at number five. And then last question, we're going to go to No Scope. When Khabib was coming up on the regional scene, some of his opponents back then seemed to be more difficult than his UFC competition. Is there any fighters that Khabib fought who you took note of? None of those guys back then were really that great. It was a long time ago. Khabib looked much different than he did in his prime, even physically. The two guys, I guess, that stand out somewhat that I saw were Shamil Abdullah-Karimov, who was the last of 3 fights for Khabib in a tournament. He did pretty well. He fought to a decision, which was only 2 rounds. He was able to reverse Khabib. He was going for an armbar on him as well. Khabib didn't want to do anything in the striking with the guy, but this is so long ago that Khabib was mainly just a wrestler at that point. And the other opponent was Ali Bagov, who was a welterweight. Another fighter that was able to reverse Khabib and get on top. Had a much better first round than the second round. The first one was a lot more competitive. The second round, Ali Bagov just kept pulling guard. I don't know what he was trying to do. Khabib started headbutting him. They had a ring car girl that was doing handstands and stuff. Wild fights they have over there in Russia. And that's ultimately the end of the episode, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to give this a like. Make sure to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. And I'll see you guys in the next video.